So I finally caved and purchased a SquatMax-MD, and a lot of this was attributed to you guys asking me to review it, but also many of you guys who are users of this swore by it, and one recent reviewer finally put me over the edge, and I finally caved and made the purchase on the Titan version. Some of you guys may or may not know has collaborated with the inventor of the original SquatMax-MD to give you guys a more affordable option, but even according to Brian Hennessy, the creator, possibly might even be the superior option when you consider the various functions, the way it's designed, the price point, the versatility, and the overall manufacturing upgrades to the previous model, which despite all of that still costs a decent amount of money and takes up a considerable footprint in most people's very valuable home gym space. Which was a big reason for me personally why I didn't consider such a machine, because even though I came out in this garage gym space and incorporating more equipment, still didn't know if all the bells and whistles and the attributes of this machine were going to be worth it for me personally. Which is why in this review, I really do want to focus in on that demographic, such as myself, who maybe is already familiar with this. If you don't know what this is, of course, we'll go over it. But if you're considering making the investment, if this thing is going to be really worth it for, I don't want to say it's limited use, because it has a lot of different uses with it, which I'll get into maybe in a later video possibly. I want to focus in on just the SquatMax. While it is fairly versatile, is it still going to be worth the footprint and cost to add and incorporate into your home gym versus, say, considering another giant leg machine like this thing sitting next to me, or maybe just using a simple barbell and a squat rack. So we'll go over the general pros and cons, most importantly, how this thing really feels in the lower body department, and then at the end of the day, who would I suggest this machine be geared towards considering picking it up or maybe holding off. And at this point in time, Titan Fitness is having a Memorial Day sale. Unfortunately, this thing is not lumped in one of the discount items, although there are some things on there that I actually am considering picking up. If you guys do consider picking up this machine or anything from Titan Fitness, greatly help support me in the channel if you check out that affiliate link down below in the description box, so I can keep giving you guys honest, unfiltered reviews in the future. Before we get into unboxing, all that stuff, might as well give you guys a brief rundown of the machine and its basic features. If it isn't too obvious, this is a belt squat machine. Fairly affordable and simplistic, but also ingenious practical design, I might add, created by Brian Hennessy, a former NFL running back who we're gonna have on the channel soon. I did contact Brian, going over some other things with the machine, other exercises. He's also gonna talk about some technique things as well, so stay tuned for that. He has gone ahead and collaborated with Titan Fitness with this machine that you guys are seeing here, which is relatively fairly new. How this thing works though is very simplistic. You got a belt with some carabiner clips, you got some loops, so you can set various step heights, also adjust it to your own personal height settings or depending on what you want to do with it. Then you go ahead, you can either put resistance bands on here, which actually works out great. You guys know I cover a lot of resistance bands. Those of you guys who are into resistance bands, I think would actually really like this thing. Or put on some weights for a hybrid experience here. But you got different distance heights here. You have a different plate there to adjust a more narrow stance if you guys want to. These essentially open it up and now you're good to go. I got some band tension on here going into a basic squat pattern. Bracket, and then you're done. Now the unboxing and assembly process is pretty straightforward and actually is fairly pleasant if you don't make any mistakes like I did, which I'll share with you guys here in a second. But when I placed the order, it took roughly, very quickly actually, about 3 days to get this to my house. Titan Fitness does have their whole shipping protection thing at checkout, which I really do not like. I opted out of that. But regardless, the thing came in a very sturdy, solid box, which to me, I don't know how you can really damage this thing in shipping. You do gotta be careful though. I opened it up, there's some sharp edges that I really gashed my shin up very bad. I'll spare you guys the details in that image, but be careful. I was actually rushing this assembly. It was very simple and straightforward. Stuff was very well sealed, very well bubble wrapped. The directions are very straightforward. The steel is very solid. This thing is 11 gauge steel. This thing can handle up to 1,300 pounds. I'll put the specs here on the screen so you can get more of those details. I did actually assemble this thing myself. I would recommend you have at least another person for safety, because when I put this thing on top of this bottom frame, that was a little iffy, but I got by with it. It is pretty solid and heavy. I mean, it's 200 pounds, but the wheels make a huge difference in just moving this thing around a gym. And that to me was a big factor in consideration of why I even considered this belt squat machine compared to other ones. There's other factors, but that was definitely a primary one, is the footprint and how easy it was to move around. And then once it is fully assembled, I mean, up close, everything is really good. I love the way it aesthetically looks. I'll maybe get into this at the end. If I don't get to it, I'll say it now. This has one of those aesthetic, pleasing qualities of a machine that you actually just want to jump on and use. It's really cool in its own right. It's actually a nice kind of functional, I think it's 20 inches above to do some things if you wanted to. You gotta be careful, but like step up, some like jumps or whatever, you could do that. Not to mention there's some holes in the side that they're saying, kind of teasing some future releases of other add-ons. All sorts of add-ons. Actually, Brian Hennessy is gonna send me, I think, his adjuster pin, maybe some other things that we'll talk about and I'll feature on the channel, but a lot of things you can actually do and future things to consider with this pretty cool, versatile machine. Seat is excellent. I would not put this face down on a garage gym floor. It seemed to like to stick to stuff. Otherwise, seat is excellent. This little plate here that allows you to kind of put it over the top, allows you to kind of close the gap on that space, whether you want more of a narrow stance, which I actually did in some instances. I'll get into that. Pretty useful. Talking specifically about the belt, because this is definitely a huge concern for some people, is if this thing is uncomfortable or it's kind of cheap, it's going to kind of ruin the whole machine. But they do include this very durable, very cool, very comfortable belt that, according to Brian Hennessy, was designed to his specs, very similar to his belt that he sells. And that's a big thing, I think, for a lot of people, that this is basically, you're getting a nice quality belt along with this machine. Very comfortable. I think at first glance, the untrained eye doesn't look like much, but I will say once you use it and just kind of feel it, I think this is a very nice, solid belt that comes with the unit. Jumping ahead a little bit, but since we're on the topic of assembly, one con I did not like about the machine were these handles. These seem, as these things themselves feel really good, but see how there's this kind of play and give to them? I thought it was just somehow maybe my issue. I put it in wrong or something like that, but watching other people's reviews, even Brian Hennessy's SquatMax machine, they all have this little play to them. I don't really know why that is the case. Maybe it's just the design of the machine. I wish these things were solid, just as solid as the machine itself. So that was something that kind of surprised me, that you have this, nice solid unit, but then this thing has this kind of play and give to them. In an ideal world too, I almost wish there's other points to kind of hold on to, say at the bottom of a squat, to kind of brace your hands into some sort of pegs. That's just, again, some little minor things here. The handles on the Titan version are knurled compared to Brian's, which are not. They're these kind of like square, looking things. It's nice, a nice feature. It's nice rounded and knurled, but honestly, in my opinion, they're okay. I mean, it's not like something that really feels exceptional in your hand. It's good that they're knurled versus not knurled, and good that they're rounded versus the square version, but nothing that I'd say was exceptional. So I hear people kind of talking and commenting on the knurl, even Brian himself. I would say the knurling, it's okay. It feels decent. All right, so as you can see, this thing is a vertical plate loader, and for some people, that's an issue. I really don't think it's that big a deal. It doesn't take that much work and effort to load and unload the plate. Plus, I always find it's ironic when people get issues with that, because we are exercising, lifting weights up and down, and this is just part of the whole process, but I digress a little bit. I do understand for some plates, like this strength co-weight, which I do love these things. They're great USA-made plates, been a whole review on these things. It's not a giant deal. This thing, aside from having a tight fit, if you stack a bunch of strength co-weights, it is almost impossible sometimes to pull them right out of there, which is actually why I bought more of these very inexpensive ones off of Amazon. When I bought these were like 35 bucks for this reason, because of this machine and because of my quantum trainer. So if you got something like this, it's not really a big deal. Otherwise, put some little spacers in there. You can throw a magnetic weight in there, but just uneven the plates a little bit. Kind of up to you. Otherwise, taking the plates on and off, I don't think is much of a chore, especially if you're really close to, say, your weight tree. Now, something else to consider just on your personal preferences and your dimensions, it has a wide enough base for sure, but the issue is I kind of actually sometimes like to take more of a narrow stance when I do, say, a more vertical squat. If I do a more horizontal, say low bar-ish squat, of course we're not using a barbell here, but I did default to that, I'll get to that. For me, this works out fine, but if I want more of a narrow stance, you can put this foot plate insert, and you will notice that then the 45 really cannot go on there. So that leaves you with 25s, maybe 35s, but this does allow you to get more of that, the vertical, more closer stance, if that's more your personal preference. So you'll see throughout the video, I play with a variety of stances to kind of suit a variety of positions and just ways I was kind of feeling the exercise. So let's get into where it really counts, and I can understand being sympathetic to some people seeing the price of this machine, which is actually pretty inexpensive compared to other belt squat machines in the market, like Rogue, even the Pit Shark one that are up into like $4,000. Certainly some of those are commercial grade quality. I say this, you could definitely probably put in a commercial gym, in my opinion, no question. Is this going to be worth it? Say they're just getting an add-on attachment using a belt squat hack with some sort of a squat rack. definitely this thing is gonna feel different. And that's what really stood out to me first and foremost, was how this thing essentially felt. Whenever you use other apparatuses like that, and I had some things actually off camera for another review I never even got to it because I just didn't really like the way it felt. Of course, I've done them on my quantum trainers and other kind of lever gym. You can replicate it a little bit, but this is much different. Where the pressure and where the kind of the muscles are kind of stimulated is exactly in all the right spots. It has a nice even distribution. On those other machines, those squat rack attachments and things of the like, I'm not saying you can't do it, and some of you guys might actually maybe prefer those. It just kind of has that gradual kind of pull. What I like about this is the same reason I kind of like a leg press or a good feeling leg press, is getting into that kind of low position where you're kind of in the hole like this, and you feel that tension really evenly distributed, not so much on the knees or quad dominance. You certainly can adjust that, but really upper part of the hamstrings and then glutes, that's where I love feeling that stretch, and then as I'm pressing off, feeling that tension, and especially translating to the glutes as well. On this machine, you can get all sorts of positions. You can move your feet forward or back, but by the basic features and function, I love that it gets you into this kind of nice neutral squat. I'll gravitate from using a barbell, going more upright with a high bar squat, but even more in a horizontal kind of low bar squat position. And that's really what I felt this machine kind of pulling myself into. There is still kind of a somewhat of a gradual pull forward. So I really started messing with it. You can't really see it, but I really started gradually messing with it, and I'll continue to mess with it, finding that ideal kind of form that really suits me. Even though this thing is meant to be very simplistic, if you watch some videos online, you will notice that a lot of people tend to see a lot of ankle movement, either even their heels are coming off the ground or their ankles are moved medially to the inside. I think regardless, whatever type of squat you're doing on this thing, really imperative to kind of keep a nice, the best you can, nice flat, even distribution in your foot, and not having the heels, of course, definitely coming off the ground. But because you have this belt on your back, I do think there's this proprioceptive kind of sensation in your back, or essentially this feeling that as you feel this touch in your back, you do actually naturally want to cue yourself to kind of lift with the hips. And I kept thinking of Mark Rippetoe in my brain of the hip drive with the low bar squat. So I found myself, instead of thinking initially that I'd be more horizontal with the squat, how I normally kind of like to do if I have a high bar squat, I really felt myself wanting to hinge forward. And I think that's because I wanted this sensation here as I was kind of coming out of that hole. Again, you don't have to do it that way, but I found myself doing that a lot. And there were some very subtle things that as I was doing it, even watching some of the videos, some things that I personally would kind of tweak a little bit about my form in the way it was doing it. But again, you have to consider something is actively, pulling you in a certain angle. So you might want to either step a few degrees up, which I kind of liked. And that's because I kind of wish there was an option for this. I didn't like that there was this, even though there's a nice guide rail and it is kind of free floating compared to other belt squats that are out there. I didn't like this slight gradual, almost feels kind of like a easy kind of break when you feel the rod underneath going inside this hole, which is why I generally want to position myself a certain way where I was right on top of it so I didn't feel that to a high degree. Not a gigantic deal, but that's just a minor thing. I kind of wish I could go totally free floating on this, and maybe you can, I just don't know anything yet, but you could, other than like disabling that little thing down there, to kind of have it more of a free floating squat up and down. But there still is a good value, I think, for most people having that guide rod there. And if I didn't say it at the start, the MD is mobility and decompression. So mobility in the sense that you're allowing yourself to get a little more mobile compared to other belt squats that are out there, but then also the decompressive forces on your spine with the belt. I'm not gonna say this thing is totally benign, that if you have back issues, especially considering the pathology of your back, that you still couldn't hurt yourself. Sometimes things that are deemed safe can actually give people a false sense of security, and they jump into this thing with caution to the wind and end up hurting themselves. So you could do that. And I actually found that as a whole, this thing was less stressful to my body. Of course, your upper back is kind of spared a lot in this, a lot of it. Using this belt squat, I wasn't as sore, I wasn't as beaten up than when I do like heavy barbell squats. It's been a while since I've done some barbell squats, so I got squat racks coming in and out, but I know when I jump back into that, I'm gonna feel a lot more soreness. Not that soreness is indicative of effectiveness, I just found this thing feels a lot more forgiving to the body, and I think a lot of that has to go with a nice even distribution that you feel across the musculature in your lower body. This is why a lot of people do gravitate towards buying a belt squat. They could care less how much it costs because this is the only option they have to actually do any kind of weighted squat that avoids kind of stressing or compressing the back. And that's kind of a side tangent, I'll get into that. I don't think there's inherent dangers of loading your spine. That's the topic for another day though. I do think in an ideal situation, this thing is meant to be complementary or as an assistance exercise to a primary squat, specifically a barbell squat. But could you do this as your standalone squat? Of course, no question. This thing handles loads up to 1,300 pounds, I believe, well over most people's needs. I found a nice comfortable setting was maybe 2-3 plates. You could do more of that, like I said, but to really kind of, for me, get in that kind of a groove, I kind of kept the weight a little bit lower. I also found myself playing with a little bit more of a higher depth or hip angle than I would normally do if I was using a barbell squat. But again, these are just kind of some subtle things that I've been noticing personally that might not all apply to you. One thing, a general tip I'd recommend or be mindful of is pay attention to, I already talked about the heels and the feet, how they feel, but you will feel that tension in your foot, and I would kind of let that tension kind of guide you. If you're feeling a little uncomfortable in one area of the foot, maybe adjust your foot placement, get more of a setting or placement that feels a little more natural. Another giant thing I gotta comment on, because I know a lot of people watch my channel for some resistance band content, is if you are a fan of resistance band training, this feels excellent. Probably the best resistance band squat I've tried thus far on the channel is done with the SquatMax-MD. So there's a lot of you guys who write to me, I think I got one just literally the other day, I get them literally every day, of people telling me who are longtime weightlifters that'll never go back to free weights, only resistance bands. And if you are in that camp and you're diehard resistance bands, I think you guys will be pleasantly surprised how this thing feels with resistance bands. And you do not need a lot of bands on this thing to make it hard. And I would say, I wouldn't be too dogmatic in that approach. I would throw some bands on, but throw a little bit of weight on there as well for, again, that hybrid experience, if you will. But at the very least, this thing is great because you can combine the best of both worlds with free weights and maximizing the benefits of variable resistance. Then who would I recommend this to? Who would I not recommend this to? If you are somebody who has back issues, you can't vertically load your spine, you have mobility issues holding a barbell, this is pretty much a no-brainer as far as belt squats are concerned, especially when you consider the price point, versatility, and the footprint. Again, that's my opinion. Of course, there's other ones that are great that are out there as well, but they're gonna cost you a lot more money. If you're someone, and this might be the majority of people here, where you already can do a lot of basic, squatting patterns, you have a squat rack, you can do that stuff, you're considering picking up another leg machine, you're wondering if this should be it. It is different compared to a leg press. So leg press offers you some variety that is unique compared to a belt squat. This really does feel like an auxiliary assistance exercise to a squat. But with that being said, there are so many other exercises that go with it. The downside to a leg press machine is that you are pretty much fixed, and if you don't like that machine, you're gonna be kind of out of luck. So I would say that's the negative point, especially buying home gym equipment like a leg press machine. It's very subtle. There's parts of this Force USA machine I really like, but there are some things that might be a little iffy, I think, for some people giving their flexibility. Here, I think you got enough flexibility where you can fine tune a certain angle, but you might just want something a little more unique compared to a traditional squat pattern that you already might be doing. But I think if you are in that camp and you're looking for an auxiliary machine to help supplement squats, and if you got some extra space, I really don't think you can go wrong with this machine. Now, who would I not recommend this to? If you're somebody who has already seen this and you're like, I'm kind of on the fence maybe to no, then I would say don't do it. I think if you know that you're gonna like this, the light bulb should kind of going off already. If you don't have a whole lot of space, that might be able to go without saying, although I'm sure there are many people that have a very small gym space, even in their house or basement, garage, whatever, that do use these things, and that's definitely maybe not a good argument. If you're already somebody already who's doing really well and seeing great progress with a basic barbell squat or some little leg machine, leg curl, leg extension machine, kind of that basic tie in there, it might not be worth it for you. But I think in the long run, if you did go with something like this, I don't think you probably would regret it. It just would be something that would be more of a luxury item. And then one final pro that I say some machines got it and some machines don't, and this is gonna be your personal preference again, is the kind of the it factor of like, do you really wanna use it? Is it attracting you to use it? And this thing being novel and unique enough, when it comes to leg day, and that's kind of my issue, I'm always reviewing and trying different things, my legs always kind of get a back seat because I'm always experimenting with legs on new apparatuses. And this is something that now I've been wanting to use it almost every day, even though I know I shouldn't, because it is just so inviting and pretty much fun to kind of use. And to my opinion, doesn't heavily tax your legs as much as, say, doing barbell squatting, say you're doing that every day. So very forgiving, feels very good. You could probably do this every day if the intensity wasn't too high, but that's kind of a side point. Any questions, comments, feedback? I'm gonna put out some other videos with this machine in the near future, but let me know what you guys wanna see, especially questions for Brian Hennessy when I get him on here. I'll see you guys on the next video. Forgot to say though, if you do pick this machine up, always help support me on the channel. Click that affiliate link for Titan Fitness. anything on the website. They got a Memorial Day sale going on right now. I'll see you guys on the next video.